Suemo wandered in the hustle and bustle of the city. The streets after the rain were filled with moisture, and the asphalt road under his feet reflected the broken light of neon lights. He was an unemployed young man. At his 20s, he had already become ill-moved with the invisible pressure, like a thin fog covering his heart. The look of loss and curiosity on his face made him look like a dreamer lost in reality, holding an old notebook in his hand, and the cover had worn out the traces of his old months. On the street, the car rushed over like a tide, and the engine's growls and pedestrians' pace formed a hurrying conversation. Suemo lowered his head, his steps were slow and aimless, and his fingers were unconsciously rubbing the edge of the notebook. The pen tip lightly planned the paper, making a slight rustling sound, as if he was whispering his unwillingness. He murmured, his voice almost drowned out by the noise around him, "How cool would it be if I could write a fantasy world? Could this not be the pencil of my fate?" The voice fell, and he smiled lightly at the corner of his mouth, and the curve was filled with a silence of hot blood, and was quickly pulled back by the real shadow. He turned into a more secluded alley and opened a glass door of a coffee shop. The air in the store was filled with the aroma of coffee beans, mixed with the hissing sound of the steamer and the cup and plates. Suemo found a seat in the corner to sit down, his body sank into the soft chair, and ordered a cup of ordinary black coffee. The waiter hurriedly left, and he opened the notebook and danced on the paper. The words were sloppy and urgent, and he wrote, "I hope to have a fantasy career." At that moment, the heat in the store seemed to be far away, and only the warmth of coffee was scattered in the palm of the palm. Suddenly, a faint humming came from the notebook, spreading like a shaped wave. Sumo's eyes were wide, and a warm current surged from his palms, swelling into his limbs and bones. He stood up instinctively, and the coffee cup slid from his hands, hitting the tabletop, making a crisp cracking sound. The atmosphere in the store instantly condensed, and the sound declared something like a warning clock. In front of me, a translucent screen appeared, accompanied by the electronic prompt sound of ding-dong, and the words clearly appeared, "Hidden job, novelist activation." Suemo held the notebook tightly, his chest fluctuated, and his breathing became rapid. His steps echoed lightly on the floor, like a heartbeat. He stared at the virtual interface with wide eyes, and his excited emotions flooded like a tide. "It's amazing," he murmured, with panic trembling in his voice, "but, is this true? What if I miss it? No matter what, try it first, I want to become a world-class writer." The heat and blood in his words made his shoulders straight, and he couldn't help but slapped around, for fear that someone would notice this strange phenomenon. Curiosity fought against the sensation, and he decided to test this ability. He picked up the pen and hurriedly wrote on the notebook, "Make this cup of coffee hot." In an instant, white smoke appeared on the edge of the broken coffee cup, and the heat hissed, as if a shaped fire was igniting. Suemo was startled, stepped back and hit the chair behind him, and slammed into the store with a bang. He rubbed his arms, and a burst of pain appeared on his face, which quickly turned into an ecstatic laughter. "Ha ha!" He laughed loudly, almost forgetting his voice, "I did it. This is my power." Inspired, he wrote more, "It's raining in gold coins in the sky." The pencil was shaking lightly, and the buzzing sound rose again. Outside the coffee shop, the sound of sluts from the air in the backyard is filled with the sound of metal as dense as rain, mixed with people's screams and confusion. Suemo covered his head and felt the cold gold coins hitting his body, causing a stinging pain. He squatted down and hid behind the table, the noise of the background flooding like a tide. The pedestrians on the street were striking, and their feet were whispering in a group. The chaotic atmosphere made him realize that there was a risk behind the power. The sound of the system sounded again, cold and mechanical, the spiritual value is consumed, and the mission is about to start. With the warning sound, the page of the notebook flashed. Suemo sat down with a breath, his body trembling involuntarily. He raised his head, and a blurry figure flashed outside the window, accompanied by the creaking sound of the door panels far away. The figure was as difficult to grasp as a dream, bringing a sense of pressure like a shadow. Sumo's eyes gradually changed from excited to uncertainty, and his eyebrows rose lightly. "Boy, your words are powerful, but be careful, it's not as simple as novels. The low murmur came out of the window, storming in the air, like a wind slid across the corner of the coffee shop. Suemo turned around and saw only the damp street lights outside the window flashing in the night after the rain. His heartbeat calmed down, and he could not ignore the potential threat. He gazed at the flashing light on the notebook, and the figure outside the window had disappeared. The noise of the coffee shop gradually faded away, leaving only a faint buzzing sound wandering around the ears, like a call of the future. Suemo took a deep breath, and the aroma of coffee remained on his lips. He knew that this was just the beginning. Suemo sat in the corner of the coffee shop, his notebook flashing slightly in his hands, and the remaining buzzing sound seemed to be wandering around his ears. He took a deep breath, his chest was undulating and flat, and the moist street lights outside the window cast a faint light, reflecting the hesitation in his eyes. The fragrance of coffee comes from a cup of ice, and the warmth brings a bitter taste, like a sudden adventure. He held the notebook tightly, his fingers tapped the surface lightly, and the crisp sounds rumbling in the quiet, causing the noise around him to gradually fade away, leaving only the whispers of the coffee machine far away. "This is my golden opportunity," Suemo murmured, a stream of hot blood scattered in his voice, and the corners of his mouth slightly swelled. He turned the notebook open, touching the pen and printing it, making a slight rustling sound. The word was sloppy and urgent. He wrote gold coins from the sky, and each plot seemed to inject urgency. In an instant, the notebook burst out with a light golden light, warm and dazzling, like a group of hidden flames ignited in the palm of the palm. The buzzing sound rose again, low and resounding, as if the earth's movement awakened some ancient magic. He raised his head, a smug smile appeared on his face, his eyes flashing with sparks. A violent uproar came from the ceiling, like a low roar before a heavy rain. The lights in the coffee shop began to shake, casting a jumping shadow. Suemo instinctively raised his head, but only saw an invisible gap crack in the empty space, and gold coins rolled down like a storm. The first hard currency hit the table, making a crisp ding sound, followed by the second and third ones, and the sounds were mixed into a messy exchange. The sound of metal hitting filled the entire space, and he raised his arms to protect his head, but it was too late to avoid it. A hard currency rubbed over his shoulder, causing a sharp pain. He gasped and his body couldn't help but shrink back. The surrounding guests screamed, and the sounds formed a wave of chaos. The chair was overturned, and the sound of thumping on the floor was rumbling. Someone hurriedly got up and pushed and hit the tables and chairs around him. The coins fell like bamboo sticks, piled up into small hills, and the cold metal touch spread out in the air. Suemo fell to the ground, blood spurted out of the head, and the ticking sound was particularly harsh in the noise. He covered his head, his face filled with surprise and pain, his eyes narrowed slightly, trying to see this absurd scene clearly. On the floor, the sound of gold coins rolling in like a tide, bringing a ridiculous pressure that made him realize that this was no longer a simple fantasy. "Hey, this time I'm going to let the world see my novelist talent," he shouted, his voice filled with trembling, and it became sharp in the pain. As the voice fell, another hard rain fell. He instinctively curled up, and his shoulders were slammed. The pain blew over his limbs like current. He bit his teeth tightly and couldn't help but growl, "Ah! You should die. What's the backlash? What's my spiritual value? You can't move anymore, otherwise I'll die in my story." His temperament turned into panic, and his fingers groped on the floor with a notebook. The light had become weak, like a tired breath. The sirens coming from far away were sharp and rapid, as if the city's rush was responding to the storm. Suemo sat up against the wall, his body shaking slightly. He groped his pencil, touching the cold gold coins with his fingers, and his friction slid over his palms like a murmur. At that moment, the excited flames gradually faded, and the eyes turned from the fierce heat of the second child to a level of cautiousness like shadows. He lifted up a few gold coins and stuffed them into his pocket, and the jingle sounded lightly, like a warning bell. The cafe's confusion gradually subsided, and people began to talk privately, and the scratches of the chairs twitched in the air, but the waves in his heart did not stop. It turns out that ability is so dangerous. I have to be more cautious, don't let this system destroy my life. Suemo murmured, his voice low and exhausted. He stood up slowly, his shoulders aches, and forced himself to straighten his back. Outside the window, the shadows of the street lights came in, and a blurred figure flashed through, just a moment, bringing an invisible pressure. Suemo turned his head, his eyes closed to the darkness, and his heartbeat couldn't help but speed up. The coffee scent remains on the lips, and it has become unparalleled. He took a deep breath, grabbed the notebook, and walked towards the door. Outside the door, the streets after the rain were filled with damp lights, and the neon lights were shattered in the water. Suemo stepped out of the coffee shop, the gold coins in his pocket collided slightly, and the sound accompanied him like a melody. The figure had disappeared, leaving only a wave of uneasiness. He looked at the weak light in his notebook and knew that this was just an opening. The noise of the city enveloped him again, and the car passed by. The engine sounded like a roaring wilderness, but his pace was slow and firm, and the notebook in his hand was tightly held, like a double-blade drama, waiting for the book of the next story. Suemo walked along the wet street after the rain, and the notebook in his hand was like a warm stone, tightly clinging to the palm. The gold coins in the pocket collided lightly, making a slight tingling sound, accompanied by the low growl of the remote engine and the broken light of the neon light. He raised his head to the old road lights on the corner of the street, and the yellow light twisted into a blurred reflection in the puddle. The noise of the city came like a tide, and the car rushed over, leaving a burst of fuel, unable to hide his inner fatigue and hesitation. He stopped and stood under the road lights, the shadow stretching on the asphalt. The humming lights of low birds intersect with the surrounding noise, like a messy intersecting song. Suemo took a deep breath, and the damp air carried the freshness of the soil and rain, which also stirred up the waves in his chest. He took out his notebook and flipped through the blank page. His fingertips couldn't help but shake. The rough touch of his fingertips rubbed against the paper reminded him of the chaos in the coffee shop. This system, this sudden power, seemed to be a wild beast that was indecisive, waiting for his next command. The surrounding environment came alive. The raindrops dripped slowly from the house, and the crisp ticking sound was like a heartbeat. Suemo looked at the streets, and the puddles reflected colorful fragments of neon lights. Pedestrians hurriedly walked past, and their paces knocked out the rhythm in the air. There was a swaying in his heart, wrapped in a terrifying shadow. He clenched his teeth and said in a whisper, "Okay, the system, let's try it." The sound was so light that it was almost swallowed by the wind, but it seemed particularly decisive in the silence. The tip of the pen and the paper emits a slight rustling movement. The noise on the street seemed to be weaker as the tide was ebbing, leaving only the sharp sirens from the far away, reverberating like a ghost. Suemo wrote, "Let the nearby trees and trees bloom in full bloom," and the characters were crooked and had an inactive force. In an instant, a vibration came from the notebook, like a lowly lingering underground. In the background, a thin tree stands on the corner of the street, its main tree begins to twist slightly, and the buds emerge from the branches and expand rapidly. The petals spread like silk, and the fresh red and yellow scattered in the night, bringing a soft brush tone. Suemo widened his eyes and took a step back. A warm current of energy flowed into the body from the censorship and rose along the arms, flowing like a warm stream in the blood vessels. His breathing became rapid, his shoulders were slightly straight, and he did not forget to look around him. The fragrance of the flowers quietly spread, mixed with the smell of earth after the rain, and everything on the street seemed to slow down. Only the crackling sound was left, like small firecrackers scattered in the night sky. He tried to press the pressure to calm down, adjust his posture, and leaned his body towards the road light, and the buzzing sound of the light became brighter, as if responding to his shouting. "Confidence is like a dawn igniting in my heart." Suemo held the pen and the pen was touching. He quickly wrote another sentence, "Let the rain turn into a warm light." The words were no longer so trembling, as if they were controlling the rhythm of this power. The picture is as distorted as a dream, and the surrounding water puddles begin to change. The rain turned into particles of golden light, and the soft jingle sounded like a clock, illuminating the shadows on the street corners. The light particles danced in the air, bringing a warm touch, gently brushing over his skin, causing the chill to dissipate instantly. Passers-by accidentally passed by, and a woman stopped walking, and a stern voice overflowed from her mouth. "What is this?" "Oh my God, flowers and light." Her voice was quickly overwhelmed by the hurrying footsteps, and the crowd began to talk privately, but no one stayed for too long. Suemo tightly plugs the pencil in the notebook, and moves rapidly, keeping it low as much as possible. His heartbeat beat like a drum, and his head felt a little sweat, and the ice-cold touch that slipped over his skin. In the background, the echoes of unknown steps are transmitted, like ghostly low words, bringing a disturbing pressure. The return of the mission came as scheduled. A virtual light shot out from the notebook, and a crisp reminder sound echoed like a kettle. Suemo wiped the sighs and made the pace more stable. The sound of the car on the street gradually returned to normal, and the engine's roar filled the air again, but the feeling of isolation in his heart was like a shadow. He groped his pockets of gold coins, and the sound of the lens rose lightly, like a string of hidden secrets. In the shadow of the remote building, the blurred dialogue sounds drifted, and it continued, as if someone was planning a whisper. "The sound of the system is rumbling in the brain, calm and mechanical. Suemo, accept the first mission, write a passage to change the surrounding environment. Success will obtain the initial spiritual value, remember that failure will deduct your life. This is your opportunity to show the potential of the novelist." He said to himself, his voice was low, as if he was afraid of being heard from around him. "Okay, system, I know it's dangerous, but if I can control it, I can become stronger, no longer that helpless unemployed." The system responds, "The mission is activated. Your text will come true, but be cautious. Overuse will bring back the sensation." Sumo's mouth twitched involuntarily, and he whispered, "I wrote make the environment better, which should prove my ability. I want to become a world-class writer and prove myself." The system's prompt sounds again, "The mission is completed and the spiritual value is charged. But remember, the competitors are monitoring you, and the next mission will be more difficult." As the words finished, Suemo put away his pen and walked into the shadows of the street corner. The broken light of the neon light faded behind him, leaving behind the lonely light of the street light. Away from a distance, a vague figure flashed past, just a moment, like a cold wind swaying over his spine. The noise of the city continued to spread, and the smell of rain faded away, but the firmness in his pace was like the blooming flowers, quietly blooming in the night. This night is just the beginning, and more challenges are waiting. The notebook is like a double-blade sword, held in your hands, waiting for the book of the next story. Suemo walked out of the shadows on the corner of the street, and the night was as thin as a layer of thinness, covering the movements of the city. His fingers were still holding the notebook tightly, and the remaining temperature that had just been filled with flowers seemed to be in his palm. The shattered neon lights danced before his eyes, dyeing the damp streets after the rain, and the air was filled with a mixture of soil and fuel. He took a deep breath, his chest swayed slightly, and decided to try again. On the streets, people came and the engine's roar came from afar, like the whisper of a wild beast. Suemo stood at the corner of the street, leaning against a buzzing road light, and quickly turned the notebook open. The paper rustled between his fingers, and he clenched his teeth, touched the pen and the blank page. "My heart beats like a drum, banging back in my ears." He murmured, "Hey, Right Beauty loves me, this time it will definitely make me a legendary novelist." The sloppy words were wearing a crazy force, as if every painting was challenging the unknown border. In an instant, the air became thicker. A strong wind rolled from the street, rolled up the fallen leaves on the ground, and rustled on the moist asphalt road. Sumo's chest stinged, like a shaped needle piercing into the skin, reminding the risk of backlash. His breathing was rapid and his fingers were shaking involuntarily. Far away, the engine's growl became blurred and a young woman walked across the street. Her steps were light and fast, and her steps sounded like a drum beat, circling in the narrow alleys. Her eyes were fascinated and locked on Suemo, as if she was attracted by an invisible magic power. "The noise around me is getting more and more dramatic." The sound of pedestrians talking mixed into a fuzzy buzzer. Suemo took a step back awkwardly and hit the road light behind him. The sound of the metal hitting jingle was rumbling in the night sky, his heartbeat almost stopped, and the heat tide on his face was pouring. The woman speeded up her pace and shouted, "You strange guy, why do I suddenly want to chase you? Stop. Let's talk." Her voice was sharp and emotionally cut through the noise of the city, like an unexpected whip whipped Sumo's ears. He wanted to explain it, but he only felt a panic coming to his heart. The moisture left by the rain sticks to the skin, bringing an icy touch. Sumo turned around and ran away, and the soles of his shoes splashed on the sidewalk, and the sound was like sporadic explosions. The alarm sound of the remote siren was approaching, creating a tight pressure. He walked into a small alley, and the dripping sound of water in the alley and a cat called to form a background music, making his thoughts even more confused. He leaned against the wall gasping. Sumo's brain replayed the collapse of the second fantasy. His fingers held the notebook tightly, and his fingers turned white. Oh no, this is not the love I expected. I have to think about how to solve this strife. He whispered, his voice rumbling in the narrow space, with a self-deprecating bitter smile. The air in the alley was solemn, and occasionally there was a wind blowing, carrying the fragrance of coffee from the far side, which could not resolve the inner tang. Suddenly, a stranger appeared from the entrance of the alley. His figure stretched under the broken light of neon lights, his pace was rapid. "Boy, are you fucking? Don't try to escape, I think you are a snare." The stranger's shout was filled with protection anger, and the shouts of the crowd rose, and the sound of trampling in his footsteps approached like a tide. Sumo hid flexibly, jumped through a trash can, and the sound of the slam was rumbling in the night. He felt a fantastic current flowing in his body, reminding him of the double edge of his ability. The pursuit continues, and the noise of the city is like an invisible hunting scene. Sumo's breathing became heavy, and the sweat slipped over the head, mixed with the breath of rain. He turned into another little girl and shook the sound behind him. Finally, he hid in the back door of a coffee shop. The door slammed shut, and the sound was like a bell, which made him wake up. The hissing and phone sounds of the coffee machine are transmitted from the store, adding tighter levels. Leaning against the door, Sumo groped in the notebook. It shines slightly, like a group of warm flames beating in the palm of the palm. He whispered, "System, this backlash is too fierce. I have to be careful, otherwise there will be a bigger affair." The rage of regret in his temperament, and a growing determination is hidden. Far away, a door opened slowly, and the crunch was particularly harsh in the quiet. The picture is dark, and the shadow of neon lights flashes on the wall, indicating that the next challenge is coming. Sumo's shoulders were relaxed and relaxed. He knew that this was just the beginning of the story. Sumo straightened up from the back of the coffee shop, and the palpitations on his chest had not yet dissipated. The night was like ink, wrapping the edges of the city. His fingers were tightly clasped against the notebook. The faint light was like a strong flame, beating slightly in his palm. He took a deep breath. The damp air carried the fragrance of the soil after the rain, mixed with the low buzz of the far-flung vehicle, making him feel a new sense of determination. Pushing the door, the chain made a familiar creaking sound. He walked into the dim alley, and his feet splashed lightly on the wet ground. The alleys are narrow, and the walls on both sides reflect the neon fragments of the street, and the light and shadow of the red and yellow intertwined dance in the rain. Sumo leaned against the rough brick wall, feeling the touch of ice on his back. He opened the notebook and the paper made a slight rustling sound between his fingers. In the sea of brain, the spirit was like a tide. He bit his teeth tightly, touching the tip of his pen in blank pages. The first sentence came out, and the sloppy words looked particularly vivid under the light. The heavy rain on the street turned into a gentle rain to protect the safety of pedestrians. In an instant, the air became heavy. A low humming bird spilled out of the notebook, spreading like a shaped wave. The light shone brightly, dyeing his palms warm gold, and a stinging pain came from his chest, as if an invisible needle was wandering under his skin. The spiritual value is consumed quickly, and he can feel the energy in his body flowing like a flood, and his breathing becomes rapid involuntarily. The sky outside the alley began to change, and the originally sunken clouds scattered. When the rain fell, it was no longer a violent basin, but turned into a soft drizzle, knocking lightly on the roofs and on the streets. He raised his head, and the soft light of the street light shone on the rain, forming a thin protective light curtain. Far away, an out-of-control car slipped on the slippery road, and the friction between the tire and the ground was sharp, like a sudden sirens tearing the night sky. Sumo's heartbeat accelerated, and he rushed to the street, and the rain poured on his face, bringing a clear touch. In the crowd, some screamed and some retreated. He did not hesitate and flicked among the bustling pedestrians, holding the notebook tightly in his hand. The rain trunk forms an invisible barrier to resolve the crisis. He murmured softly, writing quickly on the paper with his pen tip. With a burst of energy bursting, an invisible spark exploded in the air. The rain condenses in the air, turning into a transparent barrier, blocking the way of the car. The car stopped suddenly, the engine's growl became powerless, and the tires were drawn with long watermarks on the ground. The spectators screamed in surprise, and the sounds flooded like a tide, mixing with palms and low words, and the streets became noisy and chaotic in an instant. Sumo stood still, a sense of accomplishment bulged in his chest, but was pulled back to reality by the warning sound of the spirit value. The mechanically cool sound is sent from the notebook. While the mission is underway, the spiritual value remains 20%, and the content of the writing will directly affect the reality. Please be careful to control the details to avoid backlash. He wiped off the sweat from the magnitude, and the raindrops slid down his fingertips, bringing a smell of burning. At this moment, a mysterious passerby appeared from the crowd. His figure was wrapped in a dark cloak, and there was a flash of light behind him, like a faint light in the night. Passers-by were slow and stopped in front of Sumo with a sense of pressure. His voice was low and full of warning, "Boy, you're playing with fire." Sumo was stunned, his pupils slightly shrink. He instinctively took a step back, half a step, and the rain was rising beside his shoes, making a shattering sound. He wanted to explain, but felt a sense of confidence in the middle of the second. The corners of his mouth slightly raised, and he looked at the other party. "Thank you for your reminder, but I will use my pen to write a real miracle, not only changing the streets, but also changing my own life." There was a splash of spiritual pics in his language, but also hiding his inner growth determination. The mysterious passerby did not respond immediately, his figure stretched in the flash of neon lights, and the edge of the cloak was swaying lightly. The sound of rain on the street stopped, and the sound of the car stop echoed in the air, and the sound of the spectators gradually dissipated, leaving only the slightest waves. Passers-by were sluggish, and the verbs deepened their vigilance. "You are a novice novelist, don't think that words can control everything. There are more hidden powers in this world to hunt for birds like you." His words were as cold as a wind, sweeping over Sumo's ears, making him unable to help but hold the notebook tightly. The surrounding atmosphere is calm, and the aroma of coffee comes from the restaurants that are far away, and it interacts with the fresh breath of rain, bringing a sense of peace. Sumo felt that his writing skills were more mature in this incident, and his fingertips still had the warm touch of the tip of the pen. He put away his notebook, turned toward the coffee shop, and walked on the moist ground and let out a sensation of water. After a glance, the mysterious figure of the passerby had disappeared from the alley, leaving only a hidden sound of wind in the night wind. Walking back to the coffee shop, Sumo's thoughts fluctuated like a tide. He touched his chest, and the empty feeling reminded the scarcity of the spiritual value. "I can't make mistakes again. This mission must be successful. I want to become a writer hero who can change the world," he said to himself, his voice slightly rumbling on the quiet streets. The debris of neon lights flashed on the ground after the rain, like the breath of the city, calming his inner tumbling. When he opened the door of the coffee shop, the steak rose up and walked into the warm store. The light of the notebook weakened, like the end of a dream. However, at the entrance of the alley in the night, the hidden shadow still spirals in the brain. Sumo knew that this was just another beginning of the story, and the conflict that hid the world of professionals was approaching quietly. The chair made a slight scratch sound behind him. He sat down, his eyes turned to the window, and the rain flashed under the light, indicating a future challenge. Sumo looked out the window, and the rain was flashing like a fine net under the street lights, and there was a tangle of confusion and determination in his eyes. In the coffee shop, the lights sway lightly, reflecting the coffee cup on the table. The heat inside rises, bringing a rich coffee aroma. The sound of rain hitting the windows and the low buzz of the coffee machine far away formed a soft background, as if sank the waves in his heart. He took a deep breath, the tight feeling in his chest slightly relieved, and then he stood up slowly. The chair rubbed lightly with the floor, making a short scratch sound, as if announcing the dissipation of his inner tummy. The door suddenly rose, and the crisp tinging sound broke the quiet inside the store. A blurred figure opened the door, accompanied by a humid cold wind. Mysterious editor was wearing a dark sweater, with rain dripping around her coat, and every drop came out with a slight ticking sound, leaving a string of wet footprints on the floor. Those footprints gradually appear under the light, like extraordinary traces in the night. He swept his eyes in the store, his steps were steady, like a storm waiting to be developed. Suemo raised his head, his eyes locked on the visitor, and his heartbeat accelerated involuntarily. The scarce pressure of the spiritual value made his breathing become rapid. The editor approached Sumo's table and made a short creaking sound when he pulled open the chair. The sound roared in the air, like a light bell. He sat down, the coffee cup on the table swayed slightly, making a crisp and light knock, emphasizing the formality of the meeting this time. Suemo straightened his body in a police officer, holding the notebook indelibly with his fingers, and the familiar touch brought a sense of peace. The editor's eyes were sharp and deep, and he took out a piece of manuscript from his briefcase. When the paper flips, the rustling sound rises lightly, accompanied by a fantasy light, like a hidden movement, warm and lively. Suemo reached out and touched her fingers, feeling the warmth of the paper, as if it was responding to the system mission. The sound of rain outside the window was weak, turning into a humorous background, helping him gradually turn to practical thinking from his previous impulse. Suemo, I know your abilities come from that hidden system, but use will only bring back the scent. The editor's voice is low and full of authority, like a cold wind that swept over the aroma of coffee. He continued, now, I heard me that controlling the spirit value is the key, and your goal is not to show off, but to change reality with words. I can give you the first publishing opportunity to grow from the fantasy of second-year-old to become a real writer. Sumo's words were plugged in for a moment, and his pupils dilated slightly. He thought this power could make him famous overnight, but after every use he felt the shocking void. Now, the editing words are like a key, quietly opening the shackles in his heart. He cleared his throat, and his words carried a silhouette of a hesitant response. I thought this power would make me famous overnight, but every time I used it, it made me feel amazed. If you can teach me how to calm the spiritual value, I would like to try this opportunity, not just playing with fire, but to move forward from my writer's dream. Edit the head slowly, and a slim smile appeared on the corner of your mouth. He took out another document from his briefcase, and the paper made a slight sound like a promised low-key language when it rubbed. Remember, system missions are not a scheming, it recycles your efforts, he said. I have my own secret, but now, I provide this deed to avoid interference from coming opponents and not to hinder you. Suemo responded to the test picture and couldn't help but mutter a few lines of text. A faint buzzing sound came from the air, like a wave of words coming true, spreading lightly around. His hand holding the pen shook slightly, and the familiar energy was swaying at his fingertips, tightly controlled. Edit and look at him and show the correct method. His palm slammed lightly on the table, and a faint light appeared, accompanied by a magical slight bursting sound, like a shaped spark flashing in the air. The rain on the floor reflects lights, creating a transforming visual effect. Sumo's eyes gradually calmed down, as if he had found the direction from the chaos. Edit a contract, and the edges of the paper shine under the light. This is your chance, he said. The sewing point is connected, and the fingers slide over the texture of the paper, and the touch is filled with a promised weight. In the background, the music in the coffee shop became deep, like a potential conflict. The vague sound of footsteps spread far away, as if foreshadowed by the intervention of the opponent's writers, adding a touch of tension to the entire atmosphere. The end sound was entered in the meeting, and the editing was held up, and the door rose again, and the crisp sound was heard in the store. Suemo stood up, his pace heavier than before, and his footsteps made a quick sound on the floor, symbolizing the change of personality. The sound of the rain became stronger, accompanied by the sound of the window blowing, the sound of the yelling, as if it was calling out to the outside world. Suemo pushed the door open, and the wet air came over, bringing a refreshing breath after the rain. He glanced back at the shop, and the scent of coffee was still flying in the air, which had turned into a memory. Walking out of the coffee shop, the night is spreading like a curtain. Sumo's thoughts fluctuated like a tide. When he touched his chest, the pressure of the spiritual value had slightly decreased, and was replaced by a new life of determination. Outside the window, a blurred figure moved slightly in the night, accompanied by the strong sound of the rain, like a sign of potential threat. Suemo accelerated his pace, and the rain hit his face lightly, bringing a sense of turmoil. He knew that this was just another story that opened up, and the conflict that hid the world of professionals was approaching quietly. The fragments of the street light flashed on the ground, illuminating the road ahead of him, and in that shadow, unknown challenges were awaiting him. Suemo walked into the rain curtain. The night was as thick as ink, and the rain brushed his face obliquely, bringing a biting mood. He touched his chest lightly, and the new determination was like a warm current, suffocating the surrounding depression. Street lights blurred in the moisture, reflecting the swaying reflection on the sidewalk, making every water turn into a broken lens. He accelerated his pace, and the touch of the raincoat and the water droplets burst out with a rapid rhythm, as if every step was calling for the inner warning. In front, a sound of footsteps came from the alley at the corner of the street, circling in the empty streets, like a hidden movement approaching. Suemo stopped, and the rain slid down his hair and soaked into his clothes. He looked around and his eyes closed. The figure that appeared in the shadow, Liang, the face of the opponent's rider, turned white and mocked under the light. He stood firm in the rain, and the water flowed around his foot, quietly crafting an invisible confrontation. Liang's eyes were as sharp as a sharp blade. He raised his hand and swung it. The air seemed to be twisted, and a low buzzing bird surged from all directions. Sumo's thoughts instantly stormed the chaotic fragments, and the spiritual value quickly dissipated like sand. He felt a sudden sound of the slap of the rain suddenly became sharp, like a bell roaring around his ears. His fingers tightly grasped the notebook, and the moist paper brought a cold touch to the palm. Suemo, you, a novice novelist, think that if you gain a hidden job, you can dominate everything? Liang's voice cut into the night, sweeping over like a cold wind. I will dry up your spirit and never be able to write a similar work. This is to protect the secrets of our faction. Suemo bit his teeth tightly, forcing his body to stand firm. He took out the notebook from his pocket, danced his fingers quickly on the damp paper, and the rapid friction sound of his pen touching the paper formed a rhythm with the sounds around him. Aspiration for struggle ignited in his heart, and he wrote simple words and tried to resolve the interference. Street lights began to flash, and continuous current burst out, and the air around them seemed to be pulled into a twisted shape. Liang, do you think you can defeat me by interfering? Suemo raised his head, with a spark in his language. My words are not toys, but my real weapon. I want to prove myself, not only for the sake of dreams, but also for the threats like you that are hidden in the dark. Liang's mouth slightly swelled up, and he increased his strength, and a silly murmur came from the surroundings, like an invisible touching hand trying to paint Sumo's thoughts. The lowly voice of the water droplets faded around them, instead evaporating with a slight hissing, suggesting that the reality is changing quietly. Sumo's vision blurred for a moment, but he took a deep breath and focused. The rapid collision sound of the pen tip and the paper became powerful and rhythmic, like a war drum in the low words. He wrote rain stops, and in an instant, the rhythm around him weakened, replaced by a faint ticking. The spiritual value exploded in his body, and a warm current surged from his chest, making his movements even more scattered. Sumo's eyes gradually calmed down, and Liang's figure swayed slightly, revealing some shaking noises. A voice called over and took away the remaining dampness, revealing a thread. Liang is a member of the hidden vocational faction. Don't you understand? Every time you use your ability, there will be a backlash, and you will destroy yourself. Li Ying's voice was in a hurry, and he approached step by step, but I won't give you a chance, this is just the beginning. Suemo held the tight pen notebook, his palms trembled slightly, but it did not retract. Risk? I don't care anymore. This competition has inspired my potential and I will become stronger. Next time I see you, I will use my novel to make you regret challenging me. The competition reached its climax. Suemo wrote, revealing the truth, and the last pen on the tip of the pen was drawn, and a slight burst out from the air. Far away, the thundering sound came, like a sign of a bigger storm. Li Ying's figure swayed even more violently, and the streets after the rain looked particularly clear. Suemo felt that the spiritual value stabilized, and the energy in his body calmed down like a tide. Li Ying stepped back a few steps, and the water gathered around his foot, and he turned into the shadows hidden in the corner of the street. Suemo turned away, his figure stretched under the street lights, his pencil was tightly held in his hand, and a flash of decision was flashed on his face. In the night, the shadows spread like a curtain, suggesting that the next challenge is approaching quietly. The fragments of the street lights flashed on the ground, illuminating the front, and in that unknown, the conflicts hidden in the world of professionals were waiting for him to face them. Suemo left the street after the rain, holding the notebook tightly in his hand, and the fragments of the street lights flashed in the water, guiding him into the hustle and bustle of the city. The night had not yet completely faded, and the crowds were storming under the neon lights. The moist road surface reflected the spotted light and shadow. He accelerated his pace and merged into the endless flow. He walked along the main traffic road, and the surrounding air was still fresh with the rain, mixed with the low growl of the engine and the rapid pace of pedestrians. Suemo took out the notebook, the paper was slightly damp in the palm of his palm, and when his fingertips slid over the ink, it made a slight rustling sound. He whispered his plan, his voice almost drowned by the street traffic. "This is my chance," he murmured, with a sense of confidence in his verbal tuning. "The words I wrote will make this city flow like a poem. This is the glory of my hidden career." In front of the intersection, the crowd gathered like a tide, and the lights pulled out long lines on the slippery asphalt road. Suemo stopped walking, took a deep breath, and his chest was undulating. He flipped open the notebook and danced rapidly on the paper with the tip of his pen. On the text, "City traffic is unobstructed." In an instant, the words seem to have come alive, and a faint blue light appears. In the air, a low buzzing bird quietly rose, like a swarm of bees flapping their wings from afar. At that moment, the car suddenly flattened, and the noise of the horn stopped abruptly, and replaced by the whizzing sound of the wheels slid over the ground with a swishing sound of the tires slid over the ground. Sumo's mouth was slightly curved, and he was very proud of his eyes. But this calmness is fleeting. The traffic signal light began to lose control, and the light flashed wildly in the red and green. A cart suddenly drove and hit the car next to it. The harsh geese of metal hitting tear apart the night sky, and the screams of the crowd rose and fell. Suemo was stunned, his pupils suddenly retracted, his fingers stiffly holding the notebook, and his chest tightened. The road after the rain was slippery, and his feet were rushing towards the scene of the accident, and each step seemed to remind him of the source of chaos in this scene. No, it shouldn't be like this. He was trampling on his own, but he didn't stop. Kneeling on the ground, with the notebook on his knees, Suemo hurriedly wrote, "Traffic has returned to normal, no one has been injured." The text flashed blue light again, accompanied by a slight crackling sound, like a small spark scattering in the air. The chaos gradually subsided, the car stopped and the people's shouts turned into lowly words. The car that was still sliding was squeaking, the tires rubbed against the ground, and he instinctively reached out and grabbed a passerby. The man was a middle-aged driver, with a moist clothes and a terrifying look in his eyes. "Sorry, this is the confusion I caused," Suemo said. His voice slapped him on the shoulder, and he patted the other party's shoulder with a sincere apology in his action. "I will repair everything. Please believe me, I'm not escaping, but learning to control this power." The driver was stunned, then calmed down, and the distance between the two people was closer at this moment. In the background, the siren's far-round sound approached, and the crowd began to calm each other, and the whispers retreated like a tide. However, the revised surrogate price quickly appeared. Sumo's head pain came like a tide, and his ears were filled with low swaying sounds, as if his heart was beating violently. He leaned against the road light, his palm resting on the cold metal pillars in his palm. The lights around him became dazzling for a moment. At this moment, a strong figure appeared from the shadow, stepped heavily in the water, making a gurgling sound. It was the assistant of the strange power. His tall body cast a long shadow under the neon light. As he approached, the muscles on his shoulders slightly raised, and his eyes were as sharp as a knife. "Boy, your riding is too risky," said the assistant of the monster, his voice low and powerful, like a steady drumbeat. "The system mission is about to be upgraded. Don't come back again, otherwise the backlash will kill you." Sumo raised his head, sweat slid from the sides of his head, and his hands were still holding the notebook and his fingers turned white. "I understand," he responded, with a growing determination in his voice. "I can no longer just write for myself, this mess will make me see the responsibility. I need your help to face the next challenge." The assistant of the strange power lightly pointed his head, reached out to hold Sumo's arm, and pulled him up from the road light. The two left the scene of the accident together, and the surrounding atmosphere became calm and quiet, leaving only the sound of the street reverberating. The system interface appeared in front of Sumo's eyes, and the red light warning flashed in the field, like a sign of thunder sound from afar. The night sky of the city faded out, and the unknown was waiting for him. Sumo and the assistant of the monster left the intersection, and the chaotic wave was still spinning in the air. The siren's sound faded away, leaving only a blurry echo in the distance. Sumo held the pen and the damp touch of the paper in his palm. His steps swayed like a boat that could not move forward in the waves. The streets after the rain reflected the spotted street lights, and the damp breath wrapped around the smell of soil and metal. They walked along the road of water, and the raindrops slid down the house, making sporadic ticks. Sumo's eyebrows were tightly locked, and a headache swelled like a tide. He pressed the sun's acupoint and his shoulders sank slightly. The assistant of the strange power quickly stretched out his arm and held his elbows calmly. The powerful palms radiated a warmth, and the footsteps of the footsteps in the puddle were shattering, accompanied by a slight sound of water. The assistant's shadow stretched out under the light, like a solid barrier, separating the noise around him. As the lane turned, they stepped into a more secluded road, spreading far away the sound of the door crunching in the wind, like hidden low words. Sumo stopped and gasped against the wall. He opened the notebook, the page flipped lightly between his fingers, and the blue light flashed between the ink, reflecting the fatigue in his eyes. The assistant looked around, his fists were clenched tightly, and the muscles on his arms were slightly raised. His warning eyes swept over the shadows, as if he was premonitioning the potential threat. In the air, the moisture after the rain gradually fades away, replaced by a cold night wind. The strange assistant helped Sumo walk towards a light on the street, and the lights buzzed in a low buzz, like a snail far away. Sumo tried to stand straight and leaned over involuntarily. The assistant took out first aid items from his backpack, a bottle of clean medicine and a piece of cloth, and gently massaged his head. The assistant's breathing was steady and powerful, and every breath was like a steady drum, bringing a reliable sense of protection. Sumo's shoulders were relaxed, and there was a flash of gratitude in his eyes, but he didn't say much, just lightly, and in the night, their shadows were dull on the light column. They continued to move forward, and the streets were filled with the sound of far-flung cars, like the low words of a river. Suddenly, a trash can was huddled in the road. The assistant took a step forward and moved it lightly. The sound of metal hitting the ground burst out. The movement was flowing and powerful, as if it was free to blow the blame, and it revealed extraordinary power. Sumo glanced at it, and the corner of his mouth slightly sneered. He didn't ask much, but just accelerated his pace. The uneasiness in his heart was slightly relieved by this reliable breath. The door of the coffee shop is right in front of you, and a warm fragrance comes over. The assistant opened the door, and the door jingled the beads crisply, and the sound of the coffee machine's steam was emitted from it, like a gentle welcome. Suemo went in first, and as he sat down, he rubbed the head and the spotted lights outside the window projected in, pulling their shadows. The assistant caught a blurry figure on the corner of the street, and the man quickly hid into the darkness, leaving a sign of warning. The sound of coffee pouring into the cup sounded, the fragrance spreading, and the warm breath wrapped around them. I originally wanted to change everything with words, but I messed up this incident again. Suemo said, his voice low, and he mocked himself. He rubbed his head, tapped his fingers lightly on the table, his eyes turning from his previous strength to being serious, but I'm determined not to fight alone. I need a partner like you to face these backlashes and crises together. The assistant of the strange power pulled open the chair and sat down. The shadow swayed on the wall. He picked up the coffee cup, took a sip, and his breathing sound remained stable. I see your potential, Suemo. From now on, I will protect you and deal with the confusion brought by these abilities. After all, I also have my own reasons not to let the hidden world swallow us. His words were firm, like a solid rock, with a hidden determination flashing in his eyes. Suemo raised his head, held the notebook tightly, and his fingers turned slightly white. Thank you, assistant, I won't be strong anymore this time. Let's complete the system tasks together and become stronger, rather than just facing the unknown threats. His words carry traces of growth, and his temperament is calm and down, like a breath of explanation. The assistant clicked his head and put down the cup. The fragrance of coffee was still floating in the air. Remember, we are a team, Suemo, but be careful, your words will not only change reality, but may also awaken the greater storm. His voice slightly heavier, his eyes cast out the window, and the shadows seemed to be ready to move. They gazed at the corner of the street by the window, and the suspicious figure had disappeared, leaving only a blurred silhouette. The system red light flashed on Sumo's notebook, like a sign of thunder from afar. In the night, the city's breathing became deeper. Suemo took a deep breath and leaned his shoulder against his assistant. In their silence, there was a new force hidden, and a bigger challenge was approaching quietly. Suemo took a deep breath and turned his tired thoughts into a desperate heart. He stood up from his seat, his pace was slightly heavy, and with a forward slightness, he walked towards the hidden table in the corner of the coffee shop. The fingers lightly tapped the edge of the pen, and the crisp knocking sound was like rain knocking on the window, accompanied by the steaming hissing and the vague conversation of the guests in the background. The assistant of the strange power followed, his steps were as steady as a rock, and he pulled open the chair to sit down. His shadow stretched out under the light, like an invisible barrier. The assistant's eyes swept through the window, and the street lights in the night were as bright as breath, like a filament of light and shadow. Suemo opened the notebook, touched the tip of the pen in the paper, and scraped out a slight rustling sound. The familiar touch made him froze, and he quickly focused, and a fantastic light flashed through his eyes. The system interface quietly appeared, and the red light in front of me began to dance, accompanied by a low prompt sound, like the wings in the distance fluttering. The spiritual value began to be consumed, and he felt a warm current flowing out from his fingertips, bringing a hidden pull. As the tip of the pen dances on the paper, the words are formed one by one, and a sudden sound comes from outside the coffee shop. Laughter and footsteps intersect, as if a warm current flows into the street. Suemo wrote, "The community residents live in harmony," and those words turned into invisible waves. Outside the window, people under the street lights began to gather themselves, their shadows stretched and interspersed in the night, and the fantastic harmony in the background was like a bird singing. The assistant raised his eyebrows lightly, leaned against the window, and the shadow of the suspicious figure flashed again, accompanied by the sound of the creaking and closing of the door panels, like the whisper of an uninvited guest. Suemo continued to write, the tip of the pen accelerated scratching, the paper was light and sensible, the system's red light jumped, and the low alarm bee sounded up around the ears. The community has expanded, and the screen extends from the coffee shop, and the entire street area wakes up. The flowers suddenly bloomed, and the petals swayed lightly in the night wind. A fragrance of flowers flew into the room, interacting with the rich coffee aroma, bringing an unexpected sweetness. Sumo's face showed a sense of confidence. He paused for a moment, his chest was undulating, and he heard the thumping sound of his heartbeat, like a drumming point far away. The assistant reminded him in a low voice, his body slightly forward and his fists were clenched tightly. That suspicious figure may have something to do with the opponent's riders. Be careful, Sumo. Changing the community is just the beginning, and the threat of the city's fate has emerged. His temperate words were holding a steel-like calmness, and his eyes were cast out the window, and the shadows seemed to be ready to move. Sumo rubbed his eyes, and the sound changed from fatigue to calm. I can't take everything alone, assistant. This time I wrote this story not only for myself, but for the future of the entire community. He held the notebook tightly and pointed the story slightly white. The action revealed a heartwarming movement, but also contained the power of rebirth. Yeah, I feel, the writer's mission is not just to play with words, but to use it to highlight reality. System, to start the mission, I want to prove my abilities. The system prompts the sound, such as the jingle of a metal hit, displaying a message the opponent approaches. The mission to change the fate of the city is activated. The assistant's breathing became more steady. He looked out the window, his eyes swept through the darkness like a sharp sword. You are not alone, Sumo, let us face it together. Your words can bring changes, but be careful of those hidden enemies. The night darkened, the fantasy light of the community spread like waves, and the fragrance of flowers faded away in the air, leaving only a spoon. Sumo finished writing and shaking his body as he stood up. The spiritual value consumption brought the blur of vision, and the low-frequency buzzing sounds around his ears were like a tide. He held the table and calmed down, feeling the roughness of the wood in his palm. The assistant stretched out his arms to protect him, and the powerful touch was like a wall. Success, but the price of this power is too high. I must be stronger, for everyone. Sumo's voice was a little painful, and he was awakened by the mission. He took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxed slightly, and his eyes flashed with a firmness. Assistant pointed the head, the shadows retracted under the light, and they gazed at the changing street outside the window. The lens slowly stretched out from the coffee shop, and a faint red light jumped in the night sky, suggesting that a greater challenge to change the fate of the city is coming. Sumo's eyes were frozen in the darkness, like a light that had not yet been extinguished. Sumo stood up, his body swaying slightly due to the exhaustion of the spiritual value. His hand was still tightly holding the notebook, and the familiar touch of the paper was now stinging. Outside the window, the glimmer of street lights flashed in the night, accompanied by the low roar of the remote car engine, like a scattered wilderness. The assistant quickly stood up, his footsteps rising rapidly on the wooden floor of the coffee shop. He moved to the door, his eyes locked in the suspicious red light. The assistant's voice was low, and there was urgency. There are rays outside, Sumo. Do you feel it? The red light seems to be summoning something. Sumo took a deep breath, and the undulating rhythm of his chest made him realize the difference in his body. His fingers shook and flipped open the notebook, touching the paper with the tip of his pen, scraping out a slight rustling sound. The warm current should have brought power, and at this time it turned into a pull, forcing him to bite his teeth. Outside the window, the red light was like a group of jumping flames, spreading into the night, and a blurred figure appeared from the corner of the street. The voice of the voice calls passed by, bringing the robe rubbing against each other, as if telling the upcoming conflict. Hidden professionals rushed into the cafe, and the door slammed open, and the sound of the shattered glass scattered in the air. The air was filled with magical energy, like a swarm of bees gathering away. He lifted his weapon, and an energy wave rushed straight into him, accompanied by a cry that tore through the air. Sumo instinctively flashed away, and the chair scraped over the floor, making a harsh scratching sound. His heart beat faster and he did not retract. The assistant jumped forward, his fist collided with the energy wave, and the explosion trembled like thunder. The air in the coffee shop seemed to solidify, and the scent of coffee scent intersected with an invisible smell of blood, reminding that this is no longer a safe corner. I can't escape anymore. Sumo's voice suddenly came out from his throat, shaking with a silk shaking, and it was as sure as a rock. He leaned against the wall, and the tip of the pen danced rapidly on the paper. As the words were formed, the golden light around him flashed up, spreading the barrier like a thin layer of light. The red light hit the barrier, making a metal-like tingling sound. The assistant fought with the enemy, and the sound of the sword dancing was mixed with breathing. His figure stretched out under the light, and his movements were flowing with hidden complexes. He glanced at Sumo's gaze and saw a shadow that was difficult to describe. The hidden profession shouted, "Fiction, your writing is too dangerous. Hand it over, otherwise I will make you regret entering this world." Sumo's chest was filled with burning pain, and the backlash power surged like a tide. He forced himself to continue writing, and the sound of the paper torn amplified in his ears. His breathing became rapid, and his fingers were holding the notebook tightly with white fingers. "Okay, I wrote the words to protect myself, but this time I feel it's not right. My spiritual value is consumed, and I can't let the backlash swallow me." The assistant's response was like a wind, "Sumo, don't be stunned. That guy is a hidden professional. We have to use your ability to fight back, otherwise we can't even survive." The rhythm of the battle accelerates, and the vibration of the energy collision makes the cafe's design slightly sensational. Sumo's vision began to blur, and the pain was like a pin, piercing his heart. He gritted his teeth and held back, and his pen tip never stopped. The golden light barrier was stable for a moment, the enemy's attack gradually weakened, and debris on the floor slammed, causing a shattered collision sound. The assistant gasped and forced the hidden job back with one punch. "Hold on, Sumo, we've been through this relationship together. But remember, it's not just us fighting in this world, some people may not be allies." The enemy stumbled back, his figure blurred at the door, and the voice took his whispers away. The air in the cafe gradually calmed down, leaving only a buzzer. Sumo leaned against the wall, his chest was undulating, his hands were calm and he lowered his pen, and his palms still had the rough touch of the paper. "This time I will use my words to protect everything, otherwise everything will be destroyed." Sumo's voice slightly regained his strength, and he woke up in his eyes. Assistant clicks the head, the shadows are retracted under the light. He stepped forward to support Sumo, and the two of them watched for a moment. The invisible bridge beam was carrying a warning that was unspeakable. The door of the cafe slammed down, and the buzzing sound of street lights continued to roar in the night. They left quickly, and their feet echoed on the streets. Sumo covered his chest and felt the faint movement of the backlash, like a hidden undercurrent. In the night, the red light flashed far away, as if mocking the arrival of the next challenge. The assistant's arm was like a solid wall, supporting his pace. The streets are whirling lightly, bringing the fragrance of flowers and the smell of coffee, which cannot cover up the deep waves in your heart. Sumo raised his head and his eyes closed far away. In the darkness, there seemed to be a new light nurturing. The assistant's breathing was steady and silent. Their contact deepened at this moment, and it was covered with a thin fog. The lifeline of the city, like the jumping red light, quietly extends. Sumo and his assistant walked along the night-covered streets, and the city's low words were like a tide, gently slapped their pace. The buzzing birds of the street lights continued, casting the swaying light and shadows, pulling their shadows into a fine detail. Sumo's chest seemed to be burned by invisible flames. His hands slid down, grabbed the assistant's arm tightly, unable to suppress the storm of pain. Suddenly, Sumo's knees slid and his hands suddenly covered his chest. He fell on the wet sidewalk, breathing turned into a series of painful growls, the sound of which was resonating with the low and muffled birds of the remote car engine. The night wind blew over, bringing the aroma of coffee left behind, and it couldn't exude the biting loneliness. Sumo's vision was blurred, and the world around him seemed to be twisted into a strange picture. He bit his teeth tightly and tried not to let his moans reveal more fragility. The assistant's movement was as fast as a flash. She squatted down and held Sumo's shoulders calmly. Her heels knocked on the stone road quickly, and the sound was like a tight drum, shaking the urgency of this moment. When she patted his back, a warm ejaculation emanated from her palms, and she couldn't completely cover the shaking of her fingertips. The flashing lights and shadows of the street lights moved on her face, reflecting the tight-knit expression of her eyebrows. The eyes flashed in the shadows, revealing a piece of unexplained grief. "Sumo, hold on." The assistant's voice was quiet and calm, and her arms surround him, trying to figure out the wave of backlash. Sumo stood up and leaned against her shoulders and moved forward. His fingers were slightly flashing, and the remaining spiritual sense was like a faint flame, flashing in the night. The low-energy buzzing sound overflowed from his body, as if a swarm of bees gathered from afar, reminding the shadow of failure of the system's mission. The night wind brings the fragrance of flowers, and the obscure low words are whispered like hidden threats in the ears. They turned into a remote alley, and the noise of the car traffic at the entrance became blurred, as if it was swallowed by the darkness. The assistant pulled Sumo and quickly took out the first aid items from his bag. The sound of the trolling was particularly harsh in the quiet. She gave him a small bottle of medicine and the movement was anxious. Sumo's vision was still blurry, and the fantasy light appeared before his eyes. Those distorted colors symbolized the backlash of the writing ability. He leaned against the cold alley walls and tried to concentrate. While muttering, Sumo's fingers plotted in the air, as if holding an invisible pen. As I wrote the interpretation, the air around me began to twist, and a magical cracking sound burst out, like the echo of shattering glass rumbling in the alley. His emotions swelled like a tide, and his fatigue and regret made him hang down lightly. That power was supposed to save Joseph, but turned into new torture. His emotional trough was revealed at this moment, and he learned to the teaching of Zwa. The assistant's comforting voice gently pressed the noise, and her hands gently covered his shoulders, bringing them closer. "Assistant, the text I wrote should have changed to reality, and it will retaliate against me like a curse." Sumo's voice was shaking with a silk shaking. He raised his head, and a flash of his eyes flashed. "I can't take it alone anymore. I need your help. This time I really learned it, otherwise the failure of the system mission will destroy everything for me." The assistant's breathing stopped slightly, she held his hand tightly, her eyes fixedly locked him. "Sumo, don't give up. Although your novel ability is dangerous, we will face it together. I will take you to find reliable people so that we can avoid backlash and make us stronger. I don't want to see you get hurt anymore." Her words flowed into his heart like a warm river. Sumo's mouth swelled up, and a burst of gratitude flashed in his eyes. He took a deep breath and the pain in his chest subsided. "Thank you, assistant, this crisis made me understand that the battle of the lonely army will only lead to failure. I will remember this teaching and prepare for future tasks." Assistant clicked the head, her voice became softer and not without losing strength. "Remember, our relationship is not a pure cooperation. We are partners, fighting against the dark side of this hidden career." She pulled him up, and the two stood together, and their feet were rumbling in the night. They walked through the streets and their paces were gradually stable. Far away, the creaking sound of the doorboard came, as if telling the potential silhouette. Sumo's inner growth was like a hidden seed, and he began to sprout. He straightened his waist and his eyes closed in front of him. The night is still shining, the cold wind blows by, and the street lights are like eyes watching the night. But in this darkness, a glimmer of hope is quietly releasing. Sumo leaned against the assistant's shoulder and stood up slowly. His eyes fixedly looked at the red light in the alley, and the jumping flames seemed to be calling for a challenge. The buzzing birds on the street lights were weak, and the fragrance of flowers brought by the night wind blew gently, as if everything was moistening in silence, waiting for the climax to arrive. Sumo took a deep breath, his shoulders fluttered slightly, the night was like a thick curtain covering the alley, and the flashes of street lights danced in front of him. The assistant's arms were relaxed and he pushed her open, stepping firmly into the depths of the alley. The moist stone road emits a crisp echo under the feet, and every step seems to be responsive to the gradually condensed determination in the heart. The cold wind whispered over, bringing the delicate whispers of the far like horns, and it was impossible to shake the light in his eyes. The assistant followed behind him, murmured a few comforting words, her voice dissipated in the air, like a warm wire. "Sumo, you can get it," she said, with unexplained grievances in her verbal tutor. The shadows on both sides of the lane are stretched, and the intermittent buzzing sounds between the street lights are like hidden fighting, which makes this silence point. Sumo's steps stopped suddenly, and he narrowed his eyes and noticed the three blurred figures floating in the darkness ahead. The deep breathing sound approached, and the scratching sound of the metal weapon rubbing into the night like a fine pinch, making people unable to help but get tight. "Who is there?" Sumo's voice was low, and he instinctively adjusted his posture, leaning against the cold wall. Those figures were in a state of silence, and three strangers radiated their own breaths from professionals. Their leader took a step forward, his weapons flashed in his hands, and the threatening breath spread. The assistant's hand holds the props tightly and prepares for battle. Sumo realized that this crisis cannot be resolved by blind impulse. He murmured with words lightly, and a faint energy buzzed in the air, like a slight air flowing around him. The invisible shield was formed, and a flash of light successfully suppressed the enemy's first wave of attacks. The enemy leader dances with weapons, and the sharp cut sound of the sharp cutting sound breaks through the night sky. "A newbie novelist, do you think words can control everything? We are ordered to stop you, otherwise your abilities will be difficult." Sumo hid to the side, and his movements were silent, and he quickly calculated the consumption of the spiritual value in his brain. His heartbeat rose like a war drum, and his fingers plotted in the air, writing cable reduction. A vine-like rope suddenly appeared on the floor, and the squeaking sound of pulling burst out, lying an enemy on the ground. The man was stalking and gasping for breath in the alleyway. The assistant saw the situation and made a thumping sound of dancing props, and took advantage of the situation to hit another enemy. "I can't let my brains destroy everything anymore. This time I will use my brain to make a profit, instead of blindly pursuing strength. I want to protect us and complete this system task." Sumo's voice was calm, and he glanced at his assistant, his eyes flashing with a mature determination. The assistant responded, "You are always second class, but now you can see that you have changed. Let's face it together. I believe your words can change reality. As long as you don't forget my help, our partner relationship is your real power." The chaotic footsteps and shouts intersected in the alley, and Sumo took the opportunity to write the phantom cluster. His complex suddenly appeared around him, and the shadow-like phantom swayed in the light and shadow, distracting the enemy. Their attack stumbled, and a sudden breath and a spell sounded. Sumo's movements became more precise. He avoided the enemy's weapons and moved his inner movements from past impulses to the calculation of strategy. In the last blow, the vines gathered tightly, and the enemy leader retreated in a wolf. Disaster? Maybe, but this time I won't let you succeed. My goal is to control this world, and you are just a stone on my way to growth. Sumo responded, with a cold confidence in his language. The enemy finally fled, leaving a rapid sound of footsteps farther away, and the fragrance of flowers flew from the entrance of the alley, reassuring the remaining tightness. Sumo relied on his assistant for a while, his chest swelled and fell. The night wind brought a sweet breath, and he took out the mysterious notebook from his pocket, and the paper rustled lightly. Turn on the page. Blurred words and sentences are drawn to the eye, suggesting the trace of the final spiritual source. The word is like a hidden password, outlining a larger silhouette, making people think. The assistant touched his arm lightly. "What is this? It seems very important." Her voice was soft, and she felt a sense of warning. Sumo held the notebook tightly, his eyes full of determination. "This is a thread, we can't stop." They left the alley together, and the light of the street light gradually stabilized, and the red light in the distance became brighter, like a light that led the way. They walked towards the center of the city, and each step was filled with new power. In the night, a piece of hope quietly released. Sumo and his assistant walked along the streets in the dark night, their paces like steady drums, circling in the air. The red light of the chicken far away was like an indesolate lead to them, and the fragrance of flowers flew from the bushes along the road, relieving the previous tightness, and unable to completely cover the slutty verbs that were concealed in the night breeze. Their breathing gradually became smooth, and each step was a result of the determination that arises from the battles in the alleys. Suddenly, a slight sound of slight echoed in Sumo's brain, like a clock from afar suddenly erupted. He stopped and his fingers couldn't help but hold the mysterious notebook, the texture of the leather surface grinding into the palm of his palm with a soft friction. The assistant immediately became alert. She looked around and her clothes rustled slightly in the night wind, revealing a soundless vigilance during her movements. "It's the system prompt," Suemo murmured, his eyes narrowing slightly, capturing the virtual light flash. In the brain, a scream-like interface appeared, and the low buzzing bird was like a hidden movement, reminding him of the arrival of a new wave of challenges. The assistant patted his shoulder lightly, and the touch of the palm was warm and stable, like an invisible support. "We're still on the way," she said, her voice softly holding awake. He responded slightly, took a deep breath, letting the night wind whisper fill his chest, and then continued to move forward. They turned into a hidden corner park, where the trees and shadows intersected, and the street lights cast a steady light, creating a tranquil urban fantasy. The wooden chairs are scattered in the night, and the horns rise from the grass, pointing to the surrounding inning. On the side of the bench in the park, Suemo stopped, and he opened the notebook, touched the paper with a pointed pen, making a slight scratch sound. The fresh smell of ink spreads out, mixed with the fragrance of flowers, evoking his memories of the previous danger, the opponent writer who tried to take a picture and writes, "Still like a dream that has not yet dispersed." "This mission is my chance," he declared loudly, lying around the verbal slightest resonance of the pages of the pencil, the sound of which echoed in the night wind, and the city far away was as vague as the background music, shaking his determination. "I want to write a book that can change the entire city so that those opponents who are hiding in the dark know that my words are not only fantasy, but also real philosophies." The assistant stood aside and pointed at her head, her breathing became more harmonious, as if responding to his hot blood. "Suemo, I understand your determination," she said, her voice softly, with unmovable loyalty. "Let's face it together. I will protect your back and make sure your spirit is worth nothing." Her words were like a warm current, resolute in the surrounding tightness. Her eyes locked him, and her eyes flashed with a sense of resoluteness, reminding him that their team had never been so tight. In Sumo's brain, his ambitions swelled like a tide. He recalled the last time that opponent's conviction, the words on the notebook flashed slightly under the light, like a living password. He wrote quickly on paper with a pen. The moist sound of the ink flowing with the virtual text came true. A faint current buzzed over his body. The consumption of spiritual value was like a shady burden, which made his shoulders sink slightly. "Remember the last time that rival writer tried to get my notebook," he said, with a warning edge in his language. "We have to recycle that snail thread, or it will snail us like an unfinished dream." The assistant's eyes became sharp. She looked far away and noticed the creaking sound of the doorboard coming from the corner. The sound was like a threatening low voice, which made her step tighter, and the rhythm of the soles of the shoe tapping the ground accelerated. "Yes, we can't let them succeed," she responded, with emotional support in her voice. "Your writing skills are so precious that we use this challenge to prove that our team is indecisive." They looked around together, and the night-flying murmurs and the slutty whispers formed a detailed network to remind them that the crisis was nowhere to be present. They were resting briefly on the bench, the wooden chair made a slight creaking sound, and Suemo leaned against the back of the chair to share his plan. "The sound flows in the air in detail, and the secret echoes are like hidden pens. We lock the direction of the red light first," he said, his fingers pounding on the notebook, hitting the sound of rhythmic points. "Use my words to create tricks to lead to the opponent's trance. You are responsible for keeping the surroundings, and our tacit understanding is the key." The assistant listened and agreed, her breathing was synchronized with his words, creating a kind of indescribable harmony. In the night, the red light flashes far away are like a light that urges people, adding to the power of adventure. After a while of rest, Suemo closed the notebook and his eyes closed the direction of the red light. His movements were serene and decisive, and the assistants followed their steps, turning deeper into the city. The buzzing sound of the street lights gradually faded behind them, and a confusing shadow flashed under the light, as if the conflict of the future was quietly curling. They continued to move forward, with the power of rebirth every step, and the light of hope brought by the night wind flashed in their hearts, leaving behind an unsolved thought. Sumo and his assistant continued to move along the street covered by night. The red light in the distance was like an indesolate confusion, slightly flashing in the darkness. Their steps were steady and had a warning. Every time they fell, they rolled on the empty asphalt road, intersecting with the squids in the night wind to form a low rhythm. The street lights cast blurred light, and the humming buzzing birds around them like hidden warning signs, reminding them of their poorest threats. Sumo suddenly stopped, and he raised his head toward the source of red light, which was an old building hidden in the alley, with its silhouette blurred in the night. My chest began to rise and fall, as if resonating with the sound far away. The night wind rolled up the fallen leaves on the ground, and the rustling sounds echoed in his ears, making him feel an invisible pressure. He murmured, turning his thoughts into a whisper, "That is our goal, we can't miss it." The assistant immediately alerted her flashlight, sweeping through the shadows, and the beam of light broke through the darkness and made a slight sound. She gently pulled Sumo's sleeve, and the touch was like a reminder, which made his thoughts come back to reality. The noise of the car flow is spread far away, like the city's whispers mocking their solitude. The assistant looked around, her movements were quick and her clothes were rustling lightly in the wind. "Be careful," she said lightly, with invisible tightness in her language. At this moment, a figure appeared from the shadow of the building. The opponent's right, Li Ying's stance was rapid and harsh, like the rhythm of leather shoes hitting the stone slab, swaying in the narrow alley. A fake smile appeared on his face, and he walked closer. The red light in the background began to flash, and the low energy buzzed like a hidden movement, covering the surroundings. Li Wang stopped in front of them, his breath was slightly unstable, as if hiding something secret. "Sumo," he opened his mouth, and the sound of the heat was not sincere. "You are here. I know you are chasing this red light. Are we not enemies? Or maybe we can cooperate." His words were splattered like wires, trying to get closer. Sumo narrowed his eyes and examined the other party. The familiar silhouette reminded him of his previous thoughts, but he still responded slightly. "We can't stop, Leon," Sumo said, full of determination. "I know you have ambitions, but this mission is my chance. I want to change everything with my words." The assistant stood aside, staring at Li Ying. She held the protective props in her hand tightly, and the cold touch on the metal surface kept her awake. "Sumo, don't believe it too much," she murmured, her voice as smooth as a stream of flowing, revealing her alertness. The night wind blows, bringing a sense of turtleness, and the croaker rises from the grass, pointing to this tight confrontation. Li Ying's smirk deepened, and his hands reached into his pockets. "Yes, Sumo, you're always so passionate," he said, with a slight sarcasm in his language, "but this world is not driven by your dream of second-year high school." As the voice fell, Leon took out a luminous device from his pocket. When the device is activated, a sharp buzzing sound comes out, like a warning piercing into the night sky. Sumo's mission prop collapsed instantly, and a harsh warning sound came to an end. His notebook moved in his hand, and the connection of the spiritual value was interrupted. The illusory light collapsed from the notebook, accompanied by a slight burst sound, like a broken dream disappearing in the air. Sumo stumbled back, his heart beat violently, and his chest felt as if he was hit by a heavy blow. His eyes gradually turned from shock to decisiveness, and in a chaotic breath, he grabbed the assistant's hand. "Li Ying, do you think this will destroy me?" he said loudly, and his voice rumbling in the alley. "It's wrong. This will only make me stronger. I will write a masterpiece that will make you regret it." The assistant quickly stepped forward to protect her. She pulled out the protective props, and the crisp sound of the metal collision echoed in the night. She stood in front of Sumo, her posture was fixed and her eyes were as sharp as a knife. "Sumo, don't move," she said, determined with support in her language. "We still have a chance. Your abilities cannot be destroyed by inconvenience. We have to find the traces of our allies." Liang's laughter cried in the air, and the sound gradually dissipated like an echo. "I betray you just to get a greater spiritual value," he said, speaking coldly, "Don't blame me, this is the law of survival." His figure retreated in the flash of red light, leaving behind a burst of energy in the air. Suemo grabbed the assistant's hand and they quickly escaped from the scene. The sound of footsteps rumbling in the alleys, rushing and chaotic. The night wind blew over, and the fallen leaves rustled behind them, and they rushed into a side alley, not in the deeper shadow. Suemo leaned against the wall and took deep breaths to adjust his emotions. His shoulders were slightly undulating, his fingers clasped the notebook tightly, and the texture of the leather surface became his only support. The assistant comforted her low voice, her hands were placed lightly on his shoulders, and the warm touch was like a thread of hope. "We'll have gone this time," she said, soft and powerful voice. "Don't forget that your words are our greatest weapon." The surrounding horns became more harsh, and the red light gradually dimmed far away, like hidden skulls. Suemo raised his head and his eyes closed a ray of light in the night sky. His eyes were fixed, and the pen in his hand was tightly held. "This is just the beginning," he murmured, with a new determination hidden in his verbal tutoring. "The alleys are as quiet as a thin layer, wrapping their breathing, making people feel the upcoming reversal. The noise of the city is far away, reminding them that the secrets of allies are waiting to be revealed." Suemo leaned against the shadow wall in the side alley, his chest undulating and down. The night was like a thick curtain, wrapped around the croaker. The sound was sharp and low, as if it was in a humble manner. His fingers clasped the notebook, and the familiar leather touch brought comfort. He took a deep breath, and the air was filled with the damp earthy smell and the smoke from the far city, and decided not to be suspicious anymore. The tip of the pen touched the paper lightly, and a slight scratch sounded like a faint spark igniting in the dark. He started writing, and his actions were quick and desperate. The notebook trembled slightly, and with the formation of each word, the scratching sound gradually spread across the croaker and turned into a steady rhythm. Sumo's eyes were locked on the paper, and his eyebrows were slightly snaked, with an unyielding flame. The assistant stood aside, her eyes falling on his wrist like a guardian light. She held the shaking hand lightly, and the warmth in her palm passed over, reconciling the invisible tightness. "Suemo," she murmured, her voice as soft as a stream, with deep support in her arms, "you are not alone, I will face you, don't forget the path we walked together, this time making your pen a true hero." The low words of the city enter from a distance, and the sound of the tide of the car flow increases like a shady wave, indicating the arrival of a change. Sumo's pen tip accelerated, and every word seemed to have come alive, flashing a faint light on the paper. A buzzing bird rose from the air, like a shaped energy condensed in the side alley. The air began to distort, and the shadows around it began to squirm, and the red light exploded from afar, turning into ripples, accompanied by the sound of the sound. The fallen leaves were rolled up and danced in the air, bringing a rustling sound. The light illuminated the narrow alleyway. Suemo stood up straight, his shoulders raised, and his eyes flashed with fire. "I can't escape anymore," Suemo said loudly, and the sound of the buzzing slab on the stone floor, reflecting the magic shield. "This pen can change everything. I want to use my words to reverse the fate of this city. No matter how terrible it is." His words were like a horn, tearing the tranquility of the night. At the same time, the red light suddenly exploded, and an explosion-like sound of thunder rose, and the gravel fell from the wall, and the sound of hitting the ground was as dense as rain. The assistant grabbed his hand and quickly stepped back a few steps, her steps echoing lightly on the stone slab. She looked around, her eyes sharply, and she captured the strangeness in the shadows. From the darkness, a figure appeared invisibly, accompanied by the creaking sound of the door. That was an ally of the previous silhouette, with a familiar breath in its blurred shape. Sumo's pendant was shining brightly, and the crackling sound of energy bursting up like flashes, illuminating everything around him. His hands twitched slightly, his heartbeat accelerated like a war drum, and the sound was rumbling around his ears. He said to himself, and his verbal adjustment must have a warning system, "I will complete the task this time, but if the backlash comes, I will also protect everyone. Write it, the text will come true." The assistant's eyes became even more distressed, and she stepped forward and hugged Sumo's shoulder. Her movements were soft. She patted his back with her palms, trying to calm the swaying body. "Suemo, your hands are shaking," she said anxiously, with long-term concerns in her voice. "Stop. We still have a chance, but don't let the spiritual value consume as much as your shackle." The surrounding environment was already in chaos, and the noise of the city was coming like a tide, passing over the thorns, and the voice was clamoring, rolling everything into the whirlpool. Suemo stood firmly, and the light of the notebook gradually faded, like a subsidence of rainstorms. The energy wave dissipated in the tunnel, leaving only the residual temperature in the air and a faint smell of ozone. He turned to look at the assistant, her eyes like a light that was lingering, and their breathing was intertwined. In the night, the lights far away are lit, pointing the silhouette of the city, revealing potential crisis. Sumo's eyes flashed with pain, and the feeling was like a stubborn sting reminded the threat of backlash. He took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxed slightly, and he still couldn't relax the pen in his hand. They supported each other and walked along the side alleys. The sound of the steps on the stone floor reverberates lightly, accompanied by the low words of the night wind. Suemo recalled his just-in-one writing, and the scratching sound of the tip of the pen was still ringing in his ears, like an unfinished melody. He knew that this was just the beginning, and the fate of the city was being modified bit by 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 bit. The assistant pinched his arm lightly, and the touch brought a warm current. "We'll find a way out," she said, calm and gentle. "Your penis is not a weapon, but our hope." As the noise of the city went far away, only the squids were left in the dark. Suemo raised his head, his eyes locked in a ray of light in the night sky. The red light had become faint, as if mocking their efforts. But at this moment, he felt a new force that surged from the bottom of his heart. The two continued to move forward, and the shadows grew in the light, indicating the arrival of the next challenge. The night is like a curtain, waiting quietly for the plot to reverse. Suemo and his assistant walked along the side alley, and the night was like an invisible curtain, wrapping them in it. The croaker came from the grass, deep and silenced, as if responding to the sound of the far city. The noise faded away like a tide, leaving only a pungent smell of metal in the air. Sumo's fingers slid across the leather cover of the notebook. The paper made a slight rustling sound in the slightest wind, accompanied by his fall in every step. The touch was like a steady movement, reminding him of his inner determination. His shoulders were slightly straight, and despite the intimate pain in his chest, the burning feeling made him feel slightly relieved every breath. The assistant walked beside her, her arms gently hooked his elbow, providing soundless support. Her breathing was steady and rapid, like a rhythmic melody, blending with the surrounding environment. She looked around, her eyes swept across the shadows, and the warning eyes reflected the faint traces of the street lights. Suddenly, from the darkness at the entrance of the alley, a figure emerged like a ghost. A low buzzer burst out from the air, like a thunder sound from afar, accompanied by the harsh sound of metal collision. The figure lifted up his weapon, and a red light burst out, tearing the night light, forcing Suemo and his assistant to instinctively take a few steps back. The sound of footsteps on the stone floor quickly returned, and the gravel jumped around their foot, bringing a shattered collision. Suemo stood firmly, and the notebook in his hand seemed to become heavier. He took a deep breath, and the pain in his chest was like a shady wave, without shaking his gaze. He held the pen and the pen tip and paper, and began to write. At the moment the text was formed, a fantastic flash of light came up, and a humble echo resonated in the alley, like an invisible energy condensing. Suemo shouted, "Assistant, keep my side. I changed the reality with words, and I will never let these guys destroy my dreams." His voice was like a steady corner, breaking through the night, shaking the airflow around him. The assistant quickly slapped in front of her, her arm swung, and she took a whispering cry, trying to block the attack. The hidden worker appears from the darkness, his silhouette is blurred and threatening, accompanied by a familiar and strange atmosphere. He lifted his weapon and launched an attack again. The imaginary figure spread like a ripple, accompanied by a strange echo effect. The phantom approached, and the air around it twisted, bringing a sharp echo, as if someone was whispering an ancient spell. Sumo's pendant light burst out, and the text he wrote turned into a barrier, making a buzzing sound of a magic shield. The broken sound of energy bursting up like a crack in glass, successfully defeating the first wave of shock. The assistant's fist was tightly clamped. She moved quickly, and her footsteps sounded and made a rapid rhythm on the stone slab, providing close-fitting cover for Sumo. Boy, do you think words can control everything? Today's your end of the day. The hidden profession roared, his voice like metal friction, with a cold ridicule. Sumo's eyes flashed with determination. He did not respond, but continued to write in his notebook. The sound of the scratched tip of the pen passes through the noise around it, and every word seems to have come alive, causing changes in the environment. The ground began to crack, and a loud bang rose, the stones collapsed, and the soil flew. The hidden job stumbled, and his figure swayed in the chaos, and Sumo took the opportunity to attack his assistant. Assistant, don't show off your strength. Your spiritual value is limited. I'll hold them forward and you'll write carefully. The assistant responded, her words were like a warm air, hiding deep feelings. She took a step forward, held the enemy's attack, and acted smoothly but failed. The battle reached its climax, and Sumo's writing ability backfires and dangers began to emerge. He felt his chest hurt like a sting, and his heartbeat was rumbling around his ears, like an internal storm. He gritted his teeth and insisted on writing the key reverse sentences, and the words turned into illusions and brought hidden professionals into it. The shattered silence sounded, accompanied by the creaking sound of the remote door. Everything seemed to be frozen in a while. In the tunnel, the energy waves dissipated, leaving only a faint movement, shaking like a shaking. Sumo helped his assistant up, and they were gasping for breath. Sweat slid from the magnitude, mixed with the smell of ozone in the air. No, my words will write in the new era. No matter how painful it is, I will overcome everything. This is just a barrier to God's work. Sumo said, although his voice was exhausted, it revealed his growing determination. The words roared in the night like an echo, illuminating the way they were moving forward. The assistant leaned against him, her hand gently slapped his shoulder, bringing a sense of comfort. Boss, she said, her gentle and determined language, we have a way out. Your pen is not a weapon, but our hope. They slowly left the scene, and the noise in the alley gradually subsided, leaving only the squids in the dark. Sumo's viewing notebook, a mysterious symbol appeared on the last page. The light flashed slightly, like a weak light from a chicken, indicating the obstacles to the future. He raised his head, the city's lights projected the continuous silhouette, their figures disappeared into the night, and a new breath of vitality quietly surged in his heart. The night is still heavy, as if it is carrying a lot of hope. Sumo and his assistant walked into the broad street from the shadows of the alleyway. The night was filled with ink, and the lights around him seemed like broken stars in the mist. Their steps gently knocked against the road, dragging back into the air, as if every step was just a sudden wave of war. Sumo pressed his chest, and the burning pain licked his lungs like a hidden flame. He straightened his spine and his eyes were locked on the city wheel ahead. The assistant's breathing was like a slight wave, steady and tightly carrying a tight snail, and her touch was like a warm current, quietly falling on his shoulders. They walked along the street, and the light cast by the lights stretched and shortened around their feet. Sumo stopped and rubbed his fingers around the notebook. The familiar leather touch seemed to inject a lot of power. He flipped open the page, rustling papers, accompanied by the low moan of the night wind. A faint light overflowed from the mysterious symbol. The symbols activate like a living creature, illuminating his tired face. The assistant looked around, and her eyes swept through the dark corner like a searchlight. The hornet suddenly became rapid, like a hidden policeman roaring in the night. Taking a deep breath, Sumo felt the pungent smell of metal smearing in the air, and the coldness penetrated into the heart. He held the notebook tightly and activated the hidden power. The words begin to flash, the low buzzing sound rises like an ancient mantra, and the air around it is slightly distorted. Far away, between the high building, a group of dark energy condensed into shape, like a group of invisible vortexes swallowing the surrounding light. The assistant's shoulders froze slightly, and her instinctive reaction made her stand closer, and her arms were scattered in stock, without sound interference. The darkness of the city dissipates and the light is reborn. Suemo wrote in his pen book, and the sentence turned into golden light and burst out. The light rushed towards the dark circle like a tide, accompanied by the harsh energy slamming, as if the brittle glass of shattered glass was rippling on the street. The architectural warning signal rises up in a blink of an eye, and turns into a harmonious melody, like a musical chapter in the distance, gradually awakening. The darkness began to disintegrate, cracks merged on the streets, and the friction between the soil and the metal rumbled. A dust of soil flew, bringing a fresh breath. Sumo's chest pain came like a tide. He bit his teeth tightly, and sweat slid down from his head and dripped onto the page of the notebook. The assistant quickly took out his handkerchief and gently wiped away his sweat, which was filled with indifferent concern. Far away, people's surprises gradually turned to cries, like in Ning after the storm, and the streets were filled with fresh air. Suemo knelt down, holding his hands on the ground, and the pain penetrated like a thorn. He raised his head, and a smile flashed in his eyes. "Assistant," he said, his voice was faintly fulfilling, "I know this will bring back, but this work is my promise. I am willing to give everything for this city, whether it is spiritual or life." The assistant lowered his waist and helped him up. Her palms were warm and steady, and she patted his back lightly. "Suemo, you are not alone," she responded, her speech whispering like a slight wind. "We walk through this darkness together, and I will protect you to the end. This is not only a mission, but also my choice, because your determination allows me to see the light of hope." They stood straight and walked back on Shinshin Street. The sound of drums like rhythm dispersed the haze. The city gradually recovered its life, the lights were lit up again, and the bells far away knocked on the deep bells, and the echo spread out in the night sky. Sumo's notebook emits a faint behead, and the warning reminds the future of the animals like a murmur. He turned his head to look at his assistant, her eyes meeting him, and the tacit understanding at that moment was like an invisible Newport, tightening them. They continued to move forward, and arrived at a high ground, and the city was fully viewed. The symbols on the notebook are flashing with a faint light, like a lightning swaying in the night. Suemo took a deep breath, the pain rested on his old plate, but he felt a force gathering in his heart. "Thank you, assistant," he said, his lips slightly slid. "When I wrote all this, I understood that the real power is not the words themselves, but the link between us. It will make us fight back." The assistant clicked slightly, her hands still resting on his shoulders, and the night wind brought a sense of turmoil, unable to blow away the warmth between them. The city lights are as flashing as stars, indicating that the next challenge is coming, and their figures are quietly moving forward in this light. Suemo and his assistant stood on the high ground. The city scenery was like a awakening scroll, and the lights flashed in the night, as if they were just blowing away from the dream. The night wind gently brushed over their faces, bringing a slight silence that could not hide the force left in the air. Sumo's chest pain subsided, as if the invisible flame had already quenched. He took a deep breath, clasped the notebook tightly with his fingers, and the familiar leather touch was injected with strength like an old friend. He turned to his assistant, his eyes flashing with a firm look, and his eyes were like a lonely star in the night sky, guiding the way forward. Far away, the siren's stern voice tore apart the silence, like a city's whisper, telling the storm. Suemo quickly turned the notebook, touching the tip of the pen and printing, making a rapid scratch sound. In the air, a low buzzing bird quietly rose, and the airflow around it twisted slightly, as if a hidden hand was shaking a line that was invisible. His fingers danced on the page, and the words emerged like living things, turning into fine particles of light, floating around. The assistant's shoulders froze slightly, and her eyes swept across the high ground, and the darkness seemed to be on the verge of motion. She held the strange weapon in her hand tightly. The metal surface reflected a faint light, ready to face any sudden threat. Suddenly, a crack broke from the high ground, and the soil and stone collapsed with a low rumbling sound. From the shadows, the group of professionals appears, their weapons flash in the moonlight, making a crisp jingle sound like an ominous clock. The low vibration of the magic shield jammed in the wind brought a cold stinging pain, approaching their foothold. Suemo bit his teeth tightly, ignoring the stinging pain in his chest, and his fingers speeded up the rhythm of his book. The text condenses and forms in the air, accompanied by the burning burst sound, and the flashes are released like smoke, resolving the enemy's attack. Passers-by came from below and were amazed. The sound came like a tide, mingling with the noise from the distance. The assistant stood up, danced his weapons, and shouted the sound of breaking through the night sky. Every time he bumped, he made a banging sound. Her figure stretched in the lights, moving in a flowing way, and finally succeeding, like an invisible wall protecting Suemo. "This god's work will change everything," Sumo's voice roared in the buzzing bird. He raised his head, his eyes like a hot flame. "The words I wrote are not only stories, but also our fate. I can't let these hidden dangers destroy everything I have worked hard for." His words merged into the air like a mantra, and the symbols on the notebook began to activate and emit a strong light. The assistant glanced at him, the corner of her mouth swelled up as she swung her weapon back to close enemy, with sound encouragement in the action. The enemy's attacks came like a tide, and their weapons collided and stormed in the high ground, unable to penetrate Sumo's defensive wires. The assistant's breathing became rapid, and her arms were shaking slightly, and she had not yet retreated. Suemo felt the consumption of the spiritual value, his heartbeat accelerated like a war drum, and the palpitations echoed around his ears. He continued to write, the fine friction sounds of the tip of the pen became the rhythm of the war, and the words turned into particles of light, swallowing the darkness around them. Far away, the city's lights swayed in the wind, bringing a warm reflection, as if cheering them on. The crisis reached its top point, a hidden professional broke through the defense line, and his weapons pointed directly at Suemo. The assistant suddenly rushed forward, and the weapon collided with the enemy's shield, making a low-frequency vibration sound. At that moment, Suemo wrote the last sentence, "In my name, the words come true. Let this city be reborn and resolve all shadows. I want to use the story to prove my value." The notebook burst out with strong light, illuminating the entire high ground, and the magical resonance spread like waves. The enemy's figures gradually dissipated in the light, leaving only a slight echo, fading away in the night wind. Suemo knelt down, the pain in his chest eased like a tide. He took a deep breath and felt the freshness of the fresh air in the air. The assistant quickly tilted his waist and helped him up. Her palms were warm and steady, and she patted his shoulder lightly. "We did it, Sumo," she said, full of gratitude. "You are the real legend. No matter what the next crisis is, I will always be with you." At this moment, a blue light from the communication device appeared from Sumo's notebook, and the sound of the mysterious edited sound came up, circling in the air like a ghost. "Suemo, your talent is finally released," his words carried ambition and recognition. "This masterpiece will make you a world-class writer, but remember, the mission of the system has just begun." Suemo stood up straight, patted his assistant on the shoulder, and they supported each other and looked around. The city's lights returned to normal, the sound of the crowd's cry and the bursting sound of the smoke fire everywhere. The noise was like a feast, marking the end of the conflict. They walked towards the city's lights together, and their feet were resounding lightly in the night wind. The symbols on the notebook sway like a glimmer of light, like a swaying light from a chicken, suggesting the arrival of a new mission. Sumo's inner changes, he was no longer the lost young man, but gradually became a legendary writer. The tacit understanding at that moment was like an invisible New York belt, which tightened them together. A meteor in the night sky was plotted, leaving a long tail, and the prosperity of the city opened before them, indicating the beginning of future adventures. Suemo smiled slightly, and the assistant's eyes met him. They continued to move forward and walked into the ocean covered with lights. Suemo and his assistant stood up straight, and the night breeze gently brushed their hair, bringing a clear hug. The light sea of the city is flashing below, like a wakened dream, washing away the previous Shanli as much as possible. Far away, the sound of the crowd came like a tide, accompanied by the hissing and bursting upward movement of the fire, responding to this reborn Ningjing. They took deep breaths and tidied their clothes, and the action was filled with a sense of fatigue and satisfaction. Suemo sniffed on the corner of her mouth, and a warm smile appeared. She patted her assistant's shoulder with her palm. The touch was like an old friend's encouragement, which made her figure sway slightly in the light. The two turned to face the city, and their feet knocked out a crisp rhythm on the high-ground stone slabs, like the sound of a heartbeat, leading them away from the once crisis island. As they walked slowly towards the high ground, their steps blended into the night, and the shadows of mirrors stretched on the stone slabs. In the night wind, the flags whistled, as if they were in the melody of humor, and the crowd below rolled up like a wave, drowned out the silence. Suemo stopped and lifted the pen in his hand. The tip of the pen reflected light, and a faint metal flash appeared. He looked back at his assistant, and the gratitude and determination in his eyes were like a beam of unextinguished fire, illuminating her gaze. The assistant responded with a slight, and the action was soft and firm. They walked down together, and on the way, their lens-like vision expanded. The streets of the city are unfolding in front of you, and the fires are ignited in the air, and the colorful light falls like rain, accompanied by the crackling sound of silk. The voices of the cry gradually became clearer, circling them, like a warm torrent, wrapping them up. Suemo walked lightly to the surrounding road lights, his fingertips slid over the metal surface, and the light flashed through the light, creating a low buzzing bird. The sound was like a hidden echo, symbolizing the wave of his abilities. When they arrived at the edge of the city, the noise around them gradually gathered into a harmonious rhythm. Suemo Zhang opened his arms and took a deep breath. The action seemed to be embracing the whole world. Far away, the clock roars deeply, and the layered laces are like an ancient song, marking the completion of the task. The assistant took out a small paper from his backpack, and the edges of the paper were shining under the light. She sent Suemo, touching the paper with her fingertips, making a rustling sound. They flipped through together and looked back at the moments of past, and those adventures were like living memories, moving around the page. As time seemed to be slow, Suemo closed the bin and raised his head to look towards the horizon. His shadow grew under the light, and the assistant stood aside, and the figures of the two intersected into a quiet picture. The night-style low-pitched words bring the wings of the remote vehicle engine, and the sound intersects the fusion of Chengdu and fantasy. They continued to move forward, their pace was light and fast, and their pace blended with the surrounding noise, gradually fading into the embrace of the city. Even after all, everything was full, Suemo said, the sound carrying a sound of conscience and reverence. His words flow like a river, revealing inner growth and achievements. This city and this journey have been changed by my words. I am no longer the lost youth, but the real master. The assistant's eyes lit up, and she looked at him with gratitude. Suemo, you did it. Her words were like gentle support, expressing loyalty and determination to look forward to the future. We have walked through the storm together. You are not only a writer, but also a legend. But I feel that this is just the beginning of a new chapter, and we can continue and fight on our shoulders. Suemo was lightly looking, his eyes flashing with joy, and his expression reflected the new goals and openness in his heart. Yes, assistant. The system gave us an opportunity, but the real story was about to begin. Thank you for being by my side. Their steps forward in the lights, the fires remain in the sky, and the warm light of the city is like a soft curtain, wrapping them. The night wind brings a clear breath, and the heat of the crowd is lingering in his ears, leaving a space of air, allowing his soul to fly freely. Suemo held the notebook with his fingers lightly, and the familiar touch was like an invisible line, connecting the past and the future. Behind him, the silhouette of the high ground gradually blurred, and a light quietly rose from the horizon ahead, suggesting the arrival of a new mission. Their shadows blend into the ocean of the city, with rhythmic rhythms carrying unspeakable promises. The sound of the fire disappeared, leaving only the rest in the night, waiting for the next story to unfold.